This episode, Deja Vu, it's all about her second trial. So there was so much we covered with the first trial. The second trial, there was so much that happened, but a lot of it kind of felt like we had seen it before. What do you think?
I'd like to just recap what the prosecution's theory was in its entirety. So they said that within a very small time period, she drove from Panaca all the way to Vegas to buy meth, which was available down the street, to meet a homeless man that somehow she knew, and was going to exchange sexual favors for drugs. He wanted to have sex prior to getting the drugs, and that angered her. When he took his pants down, she stabbed him.
The first was the scrotum. She kind of stabs him in the balls. Sorry, can I say that?
Yeah.
And then, he's holding himself, and that's when she goes and gets the bat and starts hitting him. And then I think the neck was next when he was already kind of incapacitated. And then some of the abdomen wounds were post-mortem after he died, as well as the penis and the rectum slash. But basically, their theory is she found this guy and was going to exchange sex for drugs, and something went very bad. Stephen Jackson, who I interviewed for the podcast, he was like, I don't know a lot of homeless drug dealers.
That's true.
You just...
Yeah.
He's not very good at his job if he's a homeless drug dealer, right?
Yeah, you'd think he'd be able to afford a hotel room if he was selling drugs.
Something. So that is absolutely the prosecution's theory of the case. So I kind of alluded to a lot of it was similar. For me, the big difference is in the second trial, Corinda Martin
was not allowed.
Girl, bye. She's gone because
I don't think the prosecution even tried, because they were like, she's going to be cross-examined into oblivion.
Well, and the first conviction was overturned because of Corinda Martin, and they couldn't cross-examine her about her trying to get out of prison. Another big difference is Blaze herself didn't testify. Have you read through Blaze's testimony or with Kephart? Because I'm sure you have. It felt so contentious. Yeah. Do you portray that in the movie?
Yes.
It's hard.
It's a tough one, yeah. Tough to watch when, we're just depicting it. I'm sure in person, from her perspective, it had to have been traumatizing.
This person was putting her, in prison, and I'm sure is how she looked at it.
Yeah.
So those, I would say, the two big differences. And
The third most important one to me was that a lot of the friends who said that she told them about the attack well before Duran Bailey's murder were not allowed to testify in the second one because it was hearsay, according to Judge Vega, but she allowed it in the first one, which shows a clear, in my opinion, revenge motive on her part because she felt a little insulted.
Okay, so I definitely want to get into Judge Vega, but the hearsay thing I think is so interesting because I'm not a lawyer. I do not have a legal background, but wouldn't the Dixie calling Laura Johnson is that not hearsay?
The definition, nothing.
So that hearsay is okay, right?
In fact, that's third hand, and this one was just second hand.
Right.
So.
But this goes into what I was getting anxious. I wanted to talk about it. Judge Vega. So I've talked so there's a weird law in Nevada where if a judge messes up a case, the Supreme Court sends it back to that judge to fix. So I've talked to so many people about this second trial, and they knew almost from the beginning it was over. They said, and I've not spoken to Judge Vega. Okay, so this is hearsay. What I'm saying, she had an attitude. She was upset that she had been reprimanded publicly for how she handled the first one. And she didn't let things in like the alibi witnesses.
Right. Another difference would be her father testified in the second one, but not the first one.
Yes.
So that was a change. But like you pointed out earlier, even though he said that he saw her at 7 a.m., which would have given her an alibi, close family members sometimes don't get taken seriously because it's
immediate family or... So some of the other things that Judge Vega allowed, she allowed the positive blood tests in, which the defense again argues why do we have a whole day of testimony when no blood was found? Mm-hmm. She lets that in. There was just so many things that I felt like she checked. And talking to Hans Schur with Justice Denied, he said he actually ran. Did you he might have brought this up, or either you did, but I think he told me this in the interview. He had a running log of all the overruled objections, and there was 200 right in a row that was in the prosecution's favor, and he did some like mathematical gymnastics to determine like if that was even reasonably ever possible, and of course no. So I think I have that soundbite in this episode, but it was just like she was everything the prosecution was going for, and she was a former prosecutor herself, so
she knew the game.
She knew the game. There was also some new, some DNA that was tested. Blaze was excluded from everything. Fingerprints, pubic hair. As you can imagine, semen she was excluded from. Nothing also came back to her.
The bat itself being even referred to as the murder weapon, it's just nonsensical to call that a murder weapon when there's no sign of it being used at any point.
It's one of the only things that I would say that prosecution and defense witnesses agreed on. Dr. Sims for the prosecution, the medical examiner, and then I forget the name of who the defense put up, but they both said it wasn't a bat. So why are we talking...
Or even a knife.
Right, that's right.
For the stabbings, it was scissors.
Right. So why are we talking about a bat?
Yeah.
There's just things that were, and then the defense didn't want the bat talked about. They also didn't want her license plate in there, which was fornicator with the number 4 and then the number 8, fornicator. Because when you're a teenager, you think something like that's funny, and then to a jury, imagine what the jury thought. Yeah. Oh, she has a license plate, fornicator?
Yeah.
It plays to the process. So the defense argued this has nothing to do with the case, but it plays into the prosecution's theory that she traded sex, because she's a fornicator. She traded sex for drugs. So,
what did he call her? A meth
freak.
Meth freak. Yeah, freak has a sexual connotation too as well.
That's right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. I just when I read that. So if you don't know what we're talking about, in trial 1, Kephart called Blaze a meth freak on the stand. I'm like, where's the decorum? It's just interesting. Another thing I thought was very interesting was right before Blaze's second trial, the Nevada Supreme Court actually came down with a ruling that a conviction cannot just be based on a confession. There needs to be evidence to corroborate. And the defense said, I'd like charges dismissed based on this. What did Vega say? Absolutely not. Yeah. Anything that the defense wanted, Judge Vega was like, no. Absolutely not. The other thing that, again, just drives me crazy about this case, we saw it in the first trial, we saw it in prelim, the second trial, is Dr. Sims, and I want to give him credit because he did allow me to interview him and defend himself, but he changed time of death again. He cannot figure it out, and so it would have almost been prudent for him to be like, I don't know, because the one thing that he testifies he could have done to determine time of death was test the eyes for, it's called vitreous fluid. He didn't do it. Okay? So if you didn't do it, if I was the defense, I'd be like, you can't just, he was just throwing around times. And if you talk to Blaze's supporters, he tailored and added time to fit the prosecution's theory.
But claims he wasn't pressured to do so.
He is adamant that he was not. And I asked him specifically about Kephart, did Bill Kephart pressure you? He was adamant, no. Okay. But before we even got to that part, he was saying that there was a lot of pressure in the DA's office. He said that he never himself changed, but he knew that there was pressure. So remember how Thousand was talking about minimizing?
Yeah. That's
what I thought when he was saying that. And again, I want to give him credit, but there was mistakes made on this case. He should have tested the eyes.
And the fact that he said that she's innocent.
Adamant.
That was on the record, right?
Adamant that a woman did not commit this, that this is not a crime. And he's done 10,000 autopsies. He's and then he also said that majority of sexual crimes, he said 90%, it's male. It's not women that commit these sexual crimes. So the penis cut off, the rectum stab. He was adamant that this was done by a male. But then he was like, so how did she get convicted? And I was like, sir,
Yeah.
your timeline had a lot to do with it, and I don't know.
Did you say that?
Yes, I did.
And what did he say?
Verbatim, like, I don't disagree with you on that. And he said there was a 95% chance that he was killed between this time and this time. A 5% chance it was between that 4 a.m. There was like 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. was that extension that he offered. And he said, I have no idea why prosecution would base their theory on a 5% time frame. And then he also said something very powerful. He was like, mark my words, or something to that extent, a person should not go to jail based on rigor mortis, which I thought was interesting, because that's how they determined death, because he didn't test the eyes, because he said every single body is different. So again, I want to give him credit for coming and doing the interview. And then I also asked him, I was like, do you think about this case a lot? And he said no. But then he followed up with, I've talked to dozens of DAs about this case, and I was like, well, if you're not thinking about it, what were you talking to them about? And he said that he believes he didn't answer the questions as well as he could have. So
that was probably the most powerful interview you did out of all of them.
It was a mind, I don't know if I said mind for me. So I bleeped myself, because I don't know. If you look at his record and his credentials, this is a very impressive man. He was a doctor, he's done 10,000 autopsies. And I don't know if it was just oversight, not testing the eyes to get time of death, or I don't know what happened here. But this trial, second trial, she's convicted of manslaughter, and then also that same
13 to 40 years this time.
That's right.
Yeah.
So up to 40, could be paroled after 13.
So let's talk about the jury and how there's a lot of questions about the deliberation and the time of day, and how Judge Vega, and this is another way that Judge Vega was very consequential in this, and how her bias showed through. It was 3 a.m. by the time the jury finally came with a decision.
Han Scher talked to multiple jurors who said there was people that said innocent and there was people that said guilty. So we settled, which you don't settle on someone's life, And that's absolutely how they got to the manslaughter charge. I just think about, let's say Blaze is completely innocent, right? Can you imagine going through one trial? Right? And then you're found, then you go through the second. I can't imagine what that does to your brain.
So many times in this story, she has reason to have hope, and then it's taken from her, and then reason to have hope, and then it's taken from her. The rug keeps getting pulled out from under her over and over and over. And even after the second conviction, there's more, and we're going to get to that.
There's more.
There's more, yeah. There's more heartbreak and more times where you think things are done and they're not done, and they're still not done today. I'll pass this question to you. There are a lot of reasons to believe, and Michelle Ravel feels this way too, and I believe they put this in the writ of habeas corpus, of ineffective counsel. How do you feel that Cohn and the original public defenders did for her, and in what ways were they lacking?
It's a lot. I've talked to Phil Cohn. I respect him. I think that he's a great lawyer. So Phil Cohn, right before the trial, went to Europe. I doubt he was working on the trial then. Also, she had a different attorney, right after she was arrested. So I don't know when Phil, what the timeline was, but so she was charged with murder. That second charge of sexual penetration with a dead body, she was brought to court, and she went to court without any counsel there when she was charged with it. So, and then she comes back to the prison, and I don't know who she calls again, but she calls whoever was defending her, was screaming on the phone about being charged as a sex offender when she is the victim of sex offenses. And that's what really, and so that's another thing I think maybe Corinda Martin heard was, I did, I can see that. But I think Phil Cohn was overwhelmed. I think that in criminal trials, the government has all the money. Public defenders have nothing, Also, the Supreme Court commented on how he failed to present any expert testimony that rebutted the time of death, like Dr. Sims' testimony. They should have brought in someone like Dr. Gail Anderson to do their own analysis to try to set a different timeline and kind of at least present something alternative. in talking to Phil, he has told me I didn't think she'd get convicted. So I don't think it was like he was being lazy. I think that he was like, they have nothing, which they didn't. So I think that not that he thought it would be a slam dunk, but I didn't think that he thought he was going up against Kephart.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you talked to him, did you get the sense that he admitted that he could have done more and he didn't do a lot?
This case broke him. He wanted to quit law after it. They stayed, even when Blaze had new defense counsel, they I don't know if they're still in contact, but for way after that trial, like, she and Phil remained close. She would call him from prison. She would, I know that she adored him, but I mean, I just don't know that she knew.
Because he cared.
He cared.
Despite whatever you think of the job that he did, he definitely cared. I feel.
He absolutely cared. And then, so one thing that happened in this second trial is she got a new public defender, and then she had 2 lawyers working pro bono. But from San Francisco. But what I've heard is they didn't get super along, so I don't even know how much that did to bring in the pro bono people. But when you are charged with a crime, you're in court, you have to think about all the money, the resources. The government has everything. All you have is the money that you can afford for things, and most people don't have the money to even compete with the resources.
That's right.
So yeah, absolutely, time of death should have been narrowed down. I have not dealt with a lot of murder cases where nobody can tell us when this person was murdered.
But let me defend Cohen for a second. In the preliminary hearing, Dr. Sims was a defense witness, to be honest, because the timeline he gave, they had alibis.
So I've talked to Phil Cohen I've interviewed him multiple times about this, and he told me, he was like, and he's so cool, really, he is, but he was telling me, he's like, I talked to Dr. Sims. He told me 10 hours. Then he goes to trial and he says 18. He fucked me. Like, he says it like that too,
Yeah, he did.
But I think that was a failure on Phil Cohen's part, just to
not trust the prosecutions.
To trust that he was going to do that, because even when Sims testified, he was like wishy-washy, so it wasn't like, I am certain to, so.
I mean, that doesn't feel like science, you know what I mean?
It wasn't.
That feels like speculation. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. The second trial was a trip, and then we kind of end that episode talking about Judge Vega retiring.
Speaking of Judge Vega, let's get into her.
I can tell you that she was reprimanded for keeping juries, making them deliberate, not allowing them to go home for the night, for the weekend, making them deliberate and come to an answer. And how could that not impact trials, right? One of the cases was like a murder trial, and she held the jury to come to, a consensus so that she could go on vacation the next day. She was also found to have done that to go to her kids' soccer games. And so I would like to believe that maybe there was a misunderstanding. I'm trying to be nice. What I will say about Judge Vega is, between the first trial and the second trial, it went way more prosecution, and maybe it's because she has a prosecutor's background. She believes them. She might know them. Maybe she thought, I think Blaze is guilty. We need to make sure of it, which she's not supposed to do.
Maybe the Supreme Court.
Maybe she's mad the Supreme Court scolded her.
Yeah.
And I think that this, this is something that Nevada should address. Like, if a judge messes up, should it go back to that judge?
Yeah, maybe they're seeing some value in the familiarity that the judge has in the case.
That's right. That's a good point.
But you want fresh, unbiased opinion,
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like when someone's life is at stake like that, speed or convenience shouldn't factor into a situation where someone's life can be taken from them.